We're thrilled to have you join us today as we explore how leveraging sales enablement content can drive conversions and empower sales teams. Our panelists have a wealth of information and experience in this area, and we're looking forward to hearing their thoughts. Before we dive in, let me introduce our experts today. We have Steph W. from Medallia in Sales Enablement Strategy, and Terry from MindTickle, who brings a wealth of experience, in aligning sales content with your customers' needs. So I'd love to start with a brief introduction from each of our lovely ladies today, Steph and Terry. Steph, why don't you kick us off?
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Stephanie. So Steph Benavides and I have pre-decided for you all to help keep things from getting confusing. I will be Steph, she will be Stephanie, but very excited to be with you all today. For those of you that I haven't met, hi, looking forward to connecting after this. Stephanie White, I am in the camp of seller turned sales enabler. And, I really have a passion for building from the ground up. So I am currently a senior director of sales enablement at Medallia. I'm really looking forward to digging into the conversation today.
Great.
Terry, can you share your experience and where you're at today?
Absolutely. So thank you for having me. Yes, as you said, Terry Long, I am the VP of Enablement at MindTickle. I've been here for about 2 years. Previous to that, similar to Steph, I am a salesperson turned enabler. So I've been in the enablement field now for 20 years. 10 years prior to that, I was a seller. We really focus at MindTickle specifically on behavior change. So I'm very passionate about that topic and everything that plays into behavior change, whether it's training, content, digital sales rooms, AI role plays. There's a lot of different feeds that enter into it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Terry and Steph. And I'd be remiss without introducing myself. Hi, I'm Stephanie Benavides, and I am the Vice President of Sales Enablement and Proposal Management at EXL. I bring, gosh, it's going to age me. I bring about 20 plus years of experience in this space, and I'm super excited to be here and have this wonderful conversation with both Steph and Terry. So thank you both for joining me today. So first things first, let's get a bit more into about mapping content to a buyer's journey. So Steph, can you share your approach to identifying what types of content are most impactful at different stages of the buyer's journey, and any specific examples that you might have to share?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, I love that this question is framed for the buyer's journey, not for the sales process, because we know it's not about us, right? Collateral doesn't matter if it's only valuable to sales. So I love that this is to the customer journey. So I'm going to use the expression that I know we all hear a lot these days, which is mapping to meet your customers and prospects where they are. Simple idea, but it takes a lot of intentionality, right? So sitting down and actually mapping through. And for me, it is a whiteboard exercise. I have one here in my office, and mapping out the touch points that our customers have and putting an overlay on that. What are they looking to do in each of those stages? What is it that they need to hear, see, understand, and be able to do after that for their internal conversations to move to that next stage? So if we assume for a second that marketing is driving the MQL assets, right? So that's all that beautiful stuff on the website and everywhere else. And we start at SQLs or sales qualified leads. Early stage, it's all about short and sweet content, right? This is as much about letting our buyers and prospects potentially qualify and disqualify themselves out as much as it is about us doing the same. So short and sweet content, video assets, quick infographics, things that can answer 1-2 layer questions. Short and sweet, really, really simple. I love video assets as we get a little bit further into that discovery phase to support those early stage demo asks. Right? I think we've all been there. You get a call or an inbound lead. Stephanie, I'd like to see a demo. I know exactly what I need. Just show me a demo of your product. And that's dangerous territory, right? Because I can't demo if I don't know yet what you need. And so making sure we've got some short video snippets that we can offer up to our customers for those just-in-time questions that give them just enough, not to give them the full information, but to drive conversation is really, really key. Without going too deep on all of this right now for the first question, because I certainly could, it's that later stage content where, we often see people start to throw case studies at buyers. And would love to know how you two feel about this. I don't love that approach. I don't love it on the receiving end. What do you think, Stephanie? I see your face.
I mean, I love to read, but like if it's not a story and it's just understanding like their buying process, like to me, that's not as impactful. I want to hear, I'd rather watch a video. I would much rather watch a video and understand that in visual form because I'm a visual learner than actually read. And again, like, while I love to read, it doesn't hook you as much. It's not that, like you said, 1 to 2 step approach. Buyers are coming more and more informed. We are very knowledgeable buyers in this market. And I think if you don't have good storytelling, you're going to lose people very early on in their buying process. Hot take.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. Terry, what do you think?
Great. I would agree with you. I would say we've got to get better at personalization at scale. There's a lot of research out there. Forrester specifically talks about how companies that are personalizing content are generating 40% more revenue than their peers. And that personalization requires you to actually go back, similar to what you were talking about. You have to be able to understand what are the specific questions that the buyers are looking to get answered. So it's less about stages and more about what am I trying to understand at each of those stages. And most of the time, sellers don't actually, or buyers don't actually know they don't know what stage they're at. They don't look at
Right.
buying the same way we look at selling. They're coming in and it is specifically, I need to know X. And so we've got to make sure that not only our content, but our sellers, their approach to lining that content to the buyer needs is really intentional.
Yeah. So I totally align with both of you. And I love this. I had to divert on that because I felt like I was very much on like a soapbox moment. And I was like, my POV is this. But I totally agree because I think when we talk about assets for our customers, it's not the actual asset. It's about how we tell the story behind what we did. It's not the case study 4 or 5 page or whatever it is. It's not a slide of logos. It's about what it meant and the pain that it solved. So for me, as I think through how we map those assets through the buyer's journey, it starts off short and sweet, right? Very visual with video content, very short form, and some infographics and stuff. And then we build to this more elaborate narrative, which conveys a lot more emotion. And I will say those later stages, the ability to relay assets or content with emotional storytelling, like that's next level sales training, right? Let's just call that. And that is the piece for me where the magic starts to happen when we talk about content that converts.
Mm-hmm.
That's a soundbite right there, Steph. It is. Terry, I'd like to change the subject just a little, but we'll still talk about content mapping. Have you noticed any big shifts in how sales teams are approaching and aligning their content with their buyer needs? Like, is there any sort of fun nuggets of information that you have for us?
Yes. One of them actually is the personalization at scale. So I would say there's 3. One is the personalization at scale. The second is integrating with your buyer journey insights. And then the third is really around the customer-centric content. So going back to what I had mentioned before, personalization at scale, Forrester's done a ton of research around how do you accelerate and generate revenue. That is making sure that you have very personalized content that's real time and it's meeting those requirements. The second part of that is that integration piece. So how are you aligning your content to different buyer stages and how is that giving you traction? There's a lot of emphasis. Gartner's the one that reported out on this, utilizing data analytics around buyer insights is specifically helping drive 25% additional revenue growth. So just those two things alone, getting better at prescriptively aligning content and then understanding what the interactions are like for each of those different pieces. That is critical because we don't understand our buyer intention without that. Oh, my computer is going to die. So give me 2 seconds. Let me plug in. I didn't prepare apparently.
No worries. Things happen. While you're doing that,
Okay.
we're gonna switch. You're good? Okay.
Yeah, I'm good. And going back to, so we were talking about the buyer insights, that is absolutely critical. And then the third piece of the pillar is that customer centric. And as I was mentioning earlier, making sure that you're not thinking of it as stages, but rather thinking about it, what questions they want answered. So for me personally, I go through my own exercise, every organization I've been at, and partnering with the product marketing team, going against what I have as an enablement framework. And that enablement framework maps out both the seller journey and the buyer journey and ensures that we are going through that exercise. I think Steph was alluding to this, but going through the exercise, and rather than saying, what are the pieces of content we need at stage 1 or stage 5? What is a buyer looking to have answered at each different part of their journey? And once you start going through that exercise, you often find that you probably have a mismatch of content, or the content's not actually answering that question, or the content is very inward facing versus outward facing. Mm-hmm. And it's not actually representing what you're solving. It's just telling somebody about who you are. And at the end of the day, nobody wants that. We're all going to buy something because we have a need or we have a pain. And so we need to make sure that we're partnering not only with product marketing, but we're also really working strong angles internally to help ensure that our sellers are communicating it that quite effectively.
I think you hit the nail on the head when it came to less talk about you as the vendor and more talk about what you're actually trying to meet the needs of. What are the challenges? What are the goals and the outcomes? Far too often I've seen really bad content out there where it's like beating their chest. We're so great. We're so great. Okay, great. But like, what do I do with this? You've been around for X amount of years. What are you going to solve for me? Pet peeve of mine.
Right. Yeah, we talk a lot about that. And like you said, our frame of reference is this inward focused or outward focused? Right. And if you find very quickly that this is all about me, then we know we're not telling the right story. And then there's also the mismatch of you may be telling the right story, but is it targeted to the right segment? So a commercial story is not going to necessarily resonate with an enterprise customer and vice versa, or even mid-market. So being really intentional about your personas, your industries, the segmentation, that is so critical as you map out the content as well. So you may have 2-3 different frameworks that you need to follow.
Sure. All right, we're going to switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about converting, right? Mm-hmm. And converting your deal from some of those early stages into content that closes. I'm going to go back to Steph here. And from your experience, I'd love to know how sales teams can ensure this content is easily accessible and utilized effectively during critical deal stages.
Okay, let's break this down into 2 different pieces, right? Because we know MSP audiences love like tactical. Okay, so accessibility. The obvious answer is a tool like a content management system or a shared drive. Though those of us who have been in the trenches long enough know that that alone is not solving a problem, and that can actually become a problem if that is what is put in place and that alone, right? Why? Because content goes there, it doesn't get organized properly, it sits there too long, it doesn't get updated, you end up with funny naming conventions, and your sellers, when they go to try to find it in the middle of a call, they can't find it fast, and they throw their hands up and they walk away from the tool. And that is a place we don't want to be. So some form of central repository or content management system, so important. But what we really need to focus on is sellers need to understand how, when, and why to use the content. We've already talked about looking at the customer journey and putting that first in terms of what our customers need to be able to see, hear, understand, and take away. right? To further their own internal missions within their teams. But storytelling, as you called out, Stephanie, sorry, is one of those things that takes practice. We don't instinctively see a piece of content, right? For example, a case study and think, I know exactly how to convey this. Me and my President's Club 12 years running can step in. That's not me, by the way. This is a persona. Can step in. I know exactly how to convey this, to Terry's point, to a commercial buyer, to an enterprise buyer, to a CISO versus a CRO. Those are very, very different compelling stories. So anytime that we are actually creating content, that content rollout plan needs to include a training plan that goes with it. And a couple of ways that that can show up is making sure that, for example, we may have 5, we'll just keep with the case studies, 5 case studies that we make available. And we're going to work with our teams to help them understand. In the case of Stephanie, you may be my enterprise seller. Stephanie, for your ICP in your market, these 2 really resonate that we found when we've looked at our last 12 months of data with your specific buyers. When you hear A, B, or C come up in your conversations with your customers, leverage these 2, right? On the flip side, Terry may be our commercial seller. Terry, same thing, right? This is what's really going to resonate with your customers. Here's how you position it. Here's why you position it that way. And then making sure that you're tracking that data. You can only say once up front, I know this is going to work. I know this is going to be fabulous. Stephanie, show all your customers these 2 documents and deals will close from the heavens. It'll be wonderful. If you cannot back that up by tracking your data to make sure you stay on top of the quality of those, then you're going an uphill battle.
Well, and how do you know it's working?
This is it.
Right.
Do we want to talk about that? How do we know data? How do we get the data to know that it's working? Terry, I feel like you would take on.
I will happily jump in on that one. Yes. So again, it goes back to the platform. Specifically, our platform, while the content lives in the platform, it also provides buyer insight. So sellers are going in and they're looking into the digital sales rooms to understand who's engaging with the content. Those types of analytics are being fed in the platform for additional insight, which can then be tied back to which deals closed as won versus lost, which content was aligned with those won or lost deals. Can you look at where they're falling out in the sales journey itself? So not only are you looking at it as a way to help drive conversion, but you're also looking at it as a way to understand if it's resonating with customers. Maybe some of the content doesn't have the right views. And then the question becomes, are they not viewing it because it's not relevant? Did we mistarget the audience? Did we mistarget the problem they're trying to solve? So is it a training issue or is it a content issue? Is it both? So there's a lot of different ways that you can go in and extract insights and then make necessary changes. I think the key is that it's iterative. Having data is always, I think we are all very passionate about data-driven enablement is key. It's the direction everybody should be focused on. But knowing how to be agile with that data and how to adapt quickly, that's the other part of it. And I think that's where we run into some hiccups along the way, because people can get pretty stuck in their ways and say, going back to case studies, nope, we have to have this case study. We need this. It isn't necessarily about the case study. It's, again, understanding, is it resonating? Are we driving engagement? How many other people did we drive into a digital sales room? And what content was it that they were viewing? How long were they viewing it? Who did they share it with? Did that person look at it? Did they forward that information? So there's a lot of different ways that you can really extract insight and use it to your advantage as a seller.
I think that's excellent. And it almost makes me want to take the conversation a little bit further about into that specific realm of measuring the impact, right? Mm-hmm. Steph, I'd love to understand, Terry mentioned that reiteration, right? So how do you use data to iterate and improve content, right? So if that case study is not working, how do you get everyone on the, that change management is hard, right? So how do you continue to drive things, continue to use product marketing as your lever to say, what we've got's not working, like, we need your help. What do we do?
Yeah. I think two things immediately come to mind. One is the creepy but somehow reassuring voice in the back of my head, which is like, our work in enablement is never done. It's never done, right? I think we have to, when we are putting out content, and again, we're talking about content specifically, but this could apply to training so many things. Everything has a shelf life. And the shelf life of your content, while there are some best practices out there, like you need to review it every 365 days, for example, is going to vary based on your business. A key there is if you are a SaaS company, for example, a lot of B2B SaaS companies operate on internal 2 to 4 week sprint models where they're pushing out updates to their customers. Okay, let's think about for a second, what does that mean in terms of assets in your platform to be able to articulate the value to your customers? You may actually need to be looking at some of your assets every 30 days to make sure that they're still accurate, right? Especially if they're competitive assets. So that immediately came to mind as you were speaking there. The other thing is data is great, but insights are better. So I think one of the challenges we can have is, especially if we have a large volume of assets that we leverage in the customer buying journey or in the sales process, so either customer facing or internal facing, right? It can get a little unruly. It can get a little overwhelming if we're being honest. And when we even have some of that automated reporting coming every Monday morning, because you can schedule this in some platforms, right? Hey, Stephanie, here were the top 10 assets utilized by your sales team last week. Okay, awesome. There's potentially a lot of data there, but what do you do with it? Right? Which is the conversation. And so I always try to isolate 1 or 2 data points at a time and dig into those to find insights under the data. And insights being hypothesis, right? We don't immediately come to an answer that we know is 100% correct. But if I see, for example, if we say with digital sales rooms, that there was a particular case study, again, we'll just keep with this one, that does get passed around a lot internally. Last week, it was the highest utilized piece of content in DSRs by our sellers, and it had the highest pass around rate. Well, that's really interesting. Let's dig into that data to find out why. Let's take a look at territories. Let's take a look at different verticals. Let's take a look at individual sales teams. Are there any groups that stand out there where we can start to dig into the data to understand why? Maybe that data has been skewed because we had a sales team in Europe which did a big push last week on a specific play that they wanted to do. And maybe that was the only case study that has been done in the last 6 months by a European customer. So the insight there may actually be, not that that asset is so amazing, the insight there may actually be, we need to provide our European sales team with more relevant, up-to-date assets. So simple example, but I always like to try to find that insight under the data and then ABC test it. So come up with a hypothesis. You have your control group, we're not going to change them, but come up with 2 alternatives. One that dials it up a little bit and one that dials it down a little bit. And then watch for 30 days those 3 groups and see how does that actually perform between kind of your low, medium, and high versions of those assets. What does that start to look like? That's where I love to dig in and actually start to iterate and experiment.
I love that you're not just doing A/B testing, but the ABC testing. I had never considered having that third alternative bucket. Terry, I guess, would you handle insights and data in a similar way? Is there anything that you would handle a little differently?
I don't know that I would handle it differently. We look at, I mentioned conversion rates. We look at seller buyer feedback. We're constantly going back to sales performance correlation and then your basic content engagement. So whether it's views or shares or usage, those are important data points. Again, it's all about what's the story or what's the hypothesis you're coming to based on content engagement. But then how is that correlating back to your sales metrics, your win rates, your deal size? I just read something around Gartner Insights, and they were talking about how correlation analysis with content, organizations that consistently do and have an exercise around correlation analysis achieve a 24% improvement in win rates. And so you'd ask why? Well, it's because they're going back to try to understand what works and what doesn't work, and really dig into those insights around, is there engagement? Is there views? Is it being shared? Is it tied to closed won, closed lost deals? And then the last thing is just, again, around conversion rates. So just really understanding at each of those stages, where does the content resonate? And if it's not resonating, then maybe you're not answering the right question, going back to our first comment of this session.
Well, and answering the right questions. So as part of my role, it's sales enablement, and my other world is bids and proposals, and that gets to be a very question answer driven, exercise, right? We are literally going through and answering your questions in a verbal way, maybe with some sprinkling and smattering of content thrown in there, right? A video, a case study, other things. I similarly go through this exercise to understand what content is working, what content is winning, what content is getting us out of the deal because it's not compelling or it didn't fully answer the question. And so I think making sure that you're constantly have a pulse on those different insights and drawing a story of what might be working, what might not be working. While a lot of these content systems are connected in ways, sometimes they're not, and ensuring that they're telling a cohesive story and that you're constantly reiterating to make sure that you're answering the buyer's questions in a way that is compelling, telling that story, and not always about me. It's hard, right? It is really hard in making sure it's a cohesive, compelling package. And I can't tell you, it's when I think about the number of hours that go into keeping this stuff fresh, gosh, it is exhausting. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, Steph, like this, that's your former world too, right?
Yeah. I think what you just said there, it's cool because, so for those that don't know, I had proposal response in a previous company under me as well. Steph and I actually met through that world, which is really cool.
Yes.
Years ago. I think what's really cool though about the position you have right now, Stephanie, is you see it before most of the sellers and sales leaders see it. Yeah. So when we talk about like opportunities to better align with the customer journey, in some organizations, sellers, so your hunters, are actually like working with your proposal team to complete the RFPs, right? And RFIs. But in other organizations, it's the proposal team that's going out looking for opportunities to respond to and actually having that initial conversation. And the seller only gets involved when you get shortlisted. And suddenly you need to stand and present and you need to answer those additional questions with flair. I think you've got such a cool opportunity with the function that you have today where you can see the writing on the wall, or you can see the little ripples before the waves start, and you can get ahead of it to say, so we've noticed in 7 out of the last 20 RFPs, they're starting to ask about this. Marketing, that's new. Right. Using those opportunities as intent to then build new collateral, build new assets, that's strategic, right? That's the more savvy way of going about your market today. You have to use all these tools together because otherwise, again, you're very reactive. You're just kind of responding to the next thing. If you're not building out that journey, if you're not looking at the intent and the insights, to your point, it's just reactive enablement, right? It's just reactive to the business market, where I think we're giving some
pearls of wisdom to everyone here to start to utilize some of these things in a more strategic and proactive way. So
I think the one thing I would add to that conversation is there's also this disconnect between enablement and other key stakeholders. So this is another way for instance, if your enablement team doesn't have a strong relationship or doesn't get insights from your product marketing team, and there's many cases where that actually exists, how can you partner with them to gather those insights and really help drive behavior change and drive new revenue opportunity for the organization? So finding ways to insert yourself from more that data-driven view is really critical. So I guess I would encourage people not to use this as a limiting factor, rather use this conversation to start something different and look at a different angle. Because there's always opportunity to improve. Even if the systems aren't integrated, it's just a matter of looking at it on a regular basis, inspecting it consistently, and coming up with a hypothesis or using the data to make a decision. Test and learn.
Well said. Yeah. And that's what we all learned in science class, right? Test and learn and keep iterating. Adapt or you'll be left behind. And speaking of that, there's a lot of different emerging technologies and trends on the market. There always is. And I would love to know, what do you think will have the biggest impact on how we approach sales enablement content in the next year? Steph, why don't you go first?
I feel like we almost need to make a group decision not to use the term AI in this conversation, because that feels like a given. If we park that for a second, my very personal hot take in this exact moment, because this is not rehearsed, the answer to this question is a lot of sellers that I speak to feel overwhelmed. They feel overwhelmed because the pressure has been on for multiple years in a row. The market got shaky. A lot of companies restructured. Territories changed. Budgets changed. We all know quotas change. As soon as you hit them, they often move again for the next fiscal year. And just the amount that is coming at you today to stay on top of as a seller. And again, if we just focus on SaaS products, like, because your products and services are evolving constantly, the mental load to keep learning, to keep adapting, to keep reacting to your market, and to try to keep solutions selling and string it all together while using 14, 15 tools throughout your day is wild.
Paralyzing?
Yeah, like, honestly, it is wild to think about. For those of us that started selling, it's fine. Everyone obviously knows I'm an elder millennial. It's okay. Everyone knows I'm not under 30. Those of us that started selling like 20 years ago, it was literally a paper and pencil exercise, right? Most of us did not even have Salesforce. You physically may have even had a phone book like I did. You had to look it up. You had no way to research your prospects unless you physically went and staked them out at their office and went and talked to their people. It was a much slower sales process. Now, pros and cons. Enter a lot of great tools like Zoom Info and others, and suddenly you can do a lot of the research on your prospects before you even engage them. But all of these tools come with a mental load. And so when I think about the direction that we're going to need to start going, if we all say we're not going to talk about AI, I'm going to talk about the human side, which is we need to simplify. In order to speed up with making our sellers more effective, we need to have simple focus. What are the 5 most critical things to do in your day? What are the 5 most critical things to talk to your customer about? And I'm using 5 just as a number, but that idea, laser focused on value for your customer. So cut out the noise. It may mean simplifying some of your tech stack or looking at tools that integrate better so that you can go into one tool instead of 3, right? And having things like data, but better than that, insights pushed to you from those platforms. So you don't have to go in and build a Salesforce report to find out what's happening on your accounts. Actually having that send out to you at 9 a.m. that goes beyond the data. That's the piece that I feel like the more I talk to sellers, and again, if I focus on enterprise sellers, that's what so many of them need, that simple focus to be able to deliver on what they know they need to do without all the noise around them.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I just said something spicy, and I'm just going to take a little seat back there.
Very spicy, because I think Terry and I were at a conference this last summer, and I displayed one of my slides that I was speaking about was all the different disparate tools that cover, and there's thousands of them, right? And not all of them are created equally. There's a lot of great things out there, but there's a lot of noise out there too. And I think that that's a great key takeaway. If you have 5 objectives for the year, and if your tools are not serving those objectives, simplify. Keep it simple. You know what? Keep it simple, right? Yeah. Terry, would love to know your thoughts on if there's different hot takes that you've got there.
Mm-hmm. So I would agree with you. I think this is a slow down to go fast conversation, because the buyer behavior has changed so much. So with buyer behavior evolving, and if you look at data out there today, it's anywhere between like 17 and 20%. That's how much time buyers are actually spending with sellers. That's not a lot of time. So when you ask the question, how is it evolving? It is important to look at all of the different tools and systems and integrations, but I think it's equally, if not more important, to look at where are your buyers in their behavior journey. So what does that look like? And how are we going to set ourselves up to educate them through various channels? You've got digital channels, much more so today than we ever had before. So what are we doing to help them self-educate through those channels? What are we doing to make sure that it's very personalized, that it is really driving that value-driven interaction? So thinking back to digital sales rooms, for instance, how are you creating an experience for them? You know, the topic of creating experiences for people as they buy, that's not lost in the SaaS space. I think a lot of people think it is. I don't think people always are looking at it from that lens. But buying is an emotional thing. I don't care if you're buying software or you're buying a car or a house, there's emotion attached to it at some point. Maybe it's because you want to be promoted. Maybe it's because you have a lot of responsibility in this decision. And maybe it's just because you really want to do a good job. But there's different elements of personal, emotional attachment. And so ensuring that as we're showing up, that is top of mind. And then where are we building trust? How are we credible? So how are we social proofing what we're doing? Going back to, what are you showing up with? Is it inward or outward focused? Is this really about the success you're driving with other customers? And is it relatable? Can somebody else relate to that experience? And you can start building that trust and credibility in those examples. The last thing I would say is the human element. With everything being so digital, I would say a part of what we've really lost is this human element. And people, there's a lot of different viewpoints. My viewpoint is selling still is personal. You still need to build rapport. You still need to be a human. You still need to be able to have a conversation and connect with people virtually and in person. But it's different. And that's a skill set that we're not always thinking about. And while it's not specific to content, it's specific to what we understand those interactions with content are about. So there's an intellectual curiosity that goes along with that. And I think those are some of the things that we need to be aware of as we continue to move forward in the next, 12, 24 months.
Gosh, I feel like we could have a whole nother session just on that last part, Terry. I know I could.
It's a big thing. I have actually said many times I would say the last 2 months, enablement has spawned off into 2 areas. You have the seller productivity element of it, but there is just a human activity component. How do you show up And that isn't just showing up to pitch something. It's how do I show up in my little box? What are the skills that I need to be able to demonstrate? So yes, maybe MSP wants to take that offline, and we can have an entire session around digital behavior.
A whole fireside chat right there.
Yes.
Except I'm going to just seize the tiny opportunity. Can we just call that a potential asset? Your ability to show up in a 16-inch screen can be a seller's greatest asset. An asset doesn't just mean a PDF or a slide deck, right? Or a video or an MP4 file.
Yeah.
An asset can be anytime you deliver.
Yes, 100%.
Absolutely.
This is the engagement. People are still buying from people. You're not buying from a robot.
Yeah.
And having those communication skills to be able to have a meaningful conversation. There's the art of that is quite blurry these days, I feel like, with some of our friends who I think grew up in this very digital age. And again, I think I'm going to say MSP, we might need another conversation about just that. I know we're going to be wrapping up here, so I would love to know some key learnings and takeaways, your hot takes on the wonderful conversation that we've had today. Looking ahead, Steph, I would love to know how you see buyer behavior evolving, and what should sales enable teams focus on to stay ahead?
Yeah. I think aligned with what we've all just said, it's the human element of the sale. It's honestly, I feel like it's going to be less and less about what you sell and more about how you sell it. Right? It's how we stand and deliver. It's how we show up. It's how we convey value instead of features and functionality. I saw a great meme that somebody sent me last week, which was really simple. Popeye, can of spinach, mussels. Right? And the idea being that Popeye's your buyer. You don't sell the can of spinach for what the can of spinach is. You convey the value that Popeye wants out of that can of spinach. For those that aren't familiar with the old cartoon, he has the spinach and immediately gets huge and muscular, right? It's about the value to the customer. So I think buyers are going to continue to self-educate. They're going to continue to use more back channeling and social proof and some of those near bound techniques that are growing increasingly popular. So we all need to assume that though the data may say today that, it's 70, I forget the exact percentage, but the percentage of time that buyers will actually spend with you as a seller versus doing all the other activities behind the scenes doing research is going to keep increasing. And so buyers are going to self-serve more and more. And so for sales enablement teams, having that focus, like Terry, you just kind of delineated those, right? The human side of sales. And we maybe can convince MSP to do a different session on this, but the ability to show up at a live event and work a room is a skill that a lot of our younger sellers are missing because they've never had to do that on a real conference. So those are kind of some of my key takeaways beyond the obvious, which is use data and use that data to leverage insights and keep evolving and growing with the focus on your customer. That's my takeaway from today.
And don't forget ABC, not the always be closing,
ABC.
but ABC testing.
Yeah.
All right, Terry, I would love your kind of snippets, what we've talked about today. What advice do you have in terms of starting to build or revamp their sales enablement strategies? I know you could probably go really deep on this.
I could, being cognizant of time, I'll try to synthesize it for you. I would say start with getting out of the boardroom. Not every enabler is in a boardroom, but get out of your office, hypothetically speaking, and go meet with your sellers and go meet with your buyers. And I will say I've had some enablers come back and say, I don't have access. I don't believe that. You have access. This is your job. Go meet with the sellers and the buyers and understand what works and what doesn't work. So that's number one. Once you've identified that list, and it's usually going to be a laundry list, go back and make sure you're very clear on what your organizational goals are. Because at the end of the day, the work you're doing needs to align to the organizational goals, the OKRs. If it doesn't, then you're working on the wrong things. It doesn't mean that what you're working on is not important, but it's not aligned to the organizational goals, which is what you need to spend the time on. So that would be number two. Number three is go back to the buyer journey and get very clear on what is a buyer asking and at what part of that sales journey or the buyer journey are they asking that question? And then how are you arming your sellers to show up, whether it's content or whether it's their skills or anything that's related to enablement? How are you helping to deliver that so that you can really drive the conversion and the closed won deals? As part of that, you've got the buyer journey, but you've got the buyer insights. So how are you using, going back to Stephanie's comment, everybody talks about data. Be intellectually curious. It's one of the highest performing skills. If you look at highest performers across any industry, people that are intellectually curious outperform everybody else because they're always iterating, they're testing and iterating and trying new things. So get really curious, look at the data, and don't be afraid of it. If you don't understand what to do with it, there's a lot of people that will likely be happy to help you internally or externally and say, hey, I don't understand. How do I interpret this? And what could I do with it? And then that is the iteration process. So it's a continuum. I don't think we'll ever have it fully solved because every organization is different. Sellers are changing, buyers are changing, the landscape, macroeconomics is changing. But I will say you can only control certain things. And of those that I just listed, those are within your control. So go back and take those steps and use that to your advantage to upskill yourself, upskill your team, and help your organization grow.
Wonderful. I think we're walking away with another ABC. Always be curious. So
Always be curious.
Amazing. I love it. And Steph White, I think that is one of the tags that you constantly use in your content. So full circle here. Well, ladies, I think we are out of time. I wanted to thank both of you for the immense nuggets of information that you've shared today. I think people who are listening to this are going to walk away and connect with you and want to know more. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, Steph. Good to see you both.